Hello and welcome to Daiti Dialogues on Women and Economic Growth, a forum where we explore insights at the intersection of women, work, and growth through conversations with leaders from industry, government, and civil society about what inclusive growth looks like as India progresses towards becoming Viksit Bharat. Joining me today is someone who I have personally deeply admired and has been a source of inspiration at many junctures in my career. And in fact, her career truly embodies the convergence of performance with purpose. I'm thrilled to welcome to Daiti Dialogues today Meena Ganesh. A very warm welcome, Meena, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Pooja. What a pleasure to be here in dialogue with you. I look forward to a conversation as we go along today.
Meena, you are one of India's most respected entrepreneurs, business leaders, and have had a remarkable journey spanning technology, healthcare, education. You've, of course, built Portia Medical, Tutor Vista, and now are on boards of so many leading companies like Axis Bank, Pfizer, Pidilite. Take us through your journey. What has it been like as you navigated those transitions, built multiple identities through the course of your career? You've literally worn all hats: entrepreneur, investor, business leader, board member, mother, and now a grandmother.
Of course.
So, would love to know some of the defining moments in your professional and personal journey.
Sure, Pooja. I would love to share a little bit about my journey. I spent the first 15 years of my career in the tech industry, working through multiple companies across high tech, building businesses for companies within the structure of an existing MNC, for instance. My last 5 years of corporate career was with Microsoft, where I built a bunch of businesses for them in India. It was in the year 2000 that I started my journey as an entrepreneur and built one of India's pioneering BPO companies called Customer Asset, which is now listed as Firstsource. And from there on, I've been on a journey of building businesses across multiple sectors, like you rightly mentioned, starting with BPO. Then I was in education, EdTech, as it is known today, but not just the EdTech part of it. It was real education also. We built a number of schools as well. So, and then from the year 2011, I and my husband, we started to build multiple companies simultaneously. So that's when we promoted Big Basket, Bluestone, Homelane. And in the year 2013, I started Portia Medical, not just as a promoter, but also as the CEO of the business. Now, since we are talking about diversity and inclusion, so over the last 4 decades of my career, I have seen massive transformation in how women have been joining the workforce, continuing the challenges that they've gone through and so on. In 1985, when I first started to work, I used to be posted on projects out in upcountry locations, in factory sites, etc. And getting a toilet for women itself was a challenge. So we started from there and we've come a very, very long way, as you can well imagine. The concept of diversity was non-existent. It was not just that companies and organizations did not see this as something important, but it was not something that was expected in society that women would work. So, if you look at not just the support systems within organization, but support systems outside. I mean, there was no concept of daycare in India. There were very few places that your nannies, good nannies, were not available. What do you really do if you want to be a career woman? That was a serious challenge, and many of us have gone through that and grown through that, and obviously struggled with that. From that, if you look now, obviously there is a massive transformation. There's a lot more of acceptance and desire to have women in many companies, many sectors. That's something that is seen as useful, valuable, and I have seen that transformation. Now, as an entrepreneur, it's a different story altogether. I mean, if you just look at my own journey as an entrepreneur, I've gone from sector to sector to sector. Each of those sectors meant that I have to start all over again, learning all over again, and understanding why I'm doing this. What is the driving force that I'm building this business? What difference does it make to people around me? One of the things that has always been a driver for us is that the business that we build should be in an area where there is real demand. I mean, people will actually want to pay and consume your service. And if you are no longer present in that space, somebody is going to cry, literally saying that, oh my God, I wish Big Basket was still available, or, Portia not available anymore. There's people should be upset about it. So those are things which are very important for me, because then it means that the work that you're doing is over and beyond just building a economically viable business. It's something that's actually making a difference to somebody's lives. So that has been one of the themes all across, that find those spaces where you can make a difference because a difference needs to be made, and you can make a difference because you have the capability to make the difference. So those were some of the drivers.
Right. I have personally been a beneficiary of Portia with both my father and my mother. And I know that with my father, it was so hard to find trained caregivers. Large hospitals don't have palliative care. So it was an immense service. And I so agree with you, Meena, that in the last 30 to 40 years, there has been a massive transformation. You see so many dynamic women entrepreneurs, business leaders out there talking about it. And now there are forums where, they're there, they're talking there as role models. But when you look at the numbers, they still paint a dismal story. Our female labor force participation rate has been going up. So that's the good news, from 27 to 37 to now 42% in the last 2 years. But when you look at women in the formal economy, they are still at 18% and have been there.
Correct.
And there are obviously structural barriers. Like you said, it is not just within the company, but also in the ecosystem outside, the infrastructure and the toilets that act as barriers. You built many different companies, and at least in some of them, I know that, like in Portia, almost 60% of the workforce is women.
Sure.
There is also a large cadre of women leaders. So I have two questions for you. One, despite all of these structural barriers, how did you go about moving from this token gender diversity to really building for gender parity? And two, given in India, a large part of the burden of caregiving, whether it is children or elderly, is borne by women.
Yes.
How can we move the narrative from it being just social service to needed economic infrastructure in order to unlock growth?
No, absolutely right. So let's first talk about Portia and what led to a healthy diversity ratio in Portia itself. Of course, you're right that at the front end, where we have a lot of caregivers, there is much more demand for women, and women are seen as much more conducive to be a good caregiver. So automatically that led to a large portion of our caregivers and nurses. And how many of us really, when we think of a nurse, we never think of a male nurse, right? So it's, in fact, the diversity ratio there is very, very skewed towards women. And people struggle to get male nurses because you do want male nurses for male patients in certain situations. That's what is required. So that part is more driven by the demand from the market, that people want caregivers and nurses who are of the female gender. Now, but if you look at the organization as a whole, we did not stop at just what the demand was and just fulfill the demand, but we said that as an organization, how do we build an organization which is well balanced? Now, one of the things that happens is that if you have a woman leader, you will have more women. That is the natural corollary. So perhaps the fact that I was there leading the charge over there automatically meant that the lens with which we were looking at women candidates, the kind of support that came, not because it's expected, but that's how you react automatically. If there's a pregnant woman, I don't think of, oh my God, she's going for 6 months, what a waste. That's not the thought that comes into my head first. I'm saying, okay, so she's going through pregnancy, does she need any help? and how do I make sure that she feels connected, so that we don't lose her after she finishes her pregnancy and wants to come back and be connected. So I'm thinking more of how do I support her rather than rue the fact that there's yet another woman leaving the potentially leaving the workforce for 6 months. So it's just that fundamental mindset with which, or the lens with which you look as a leader, can itself create a very different infrastructure in the organization. And this was not just true with Portia, where I was a CEO, but when I was with Tesco and setting up the Hindustan Service Center in India, again the same thing. Because I was a woman leader, it did make a difference, and the number of women that were there in my leadership were higher. Now, what it also does is that once you set that kind of a culture, the rest of the organization, the rest of the male leaders also tend to fall in place. So that's something, it's lead by example. The other thing that I must say, leaving the Tesco experience aside, because it's a corporate and you put the right structures in place, in a startup, you hire for skill, okay? And you hire very desperately for the right skill. You're not at that point in time, you're truly colorblind. You want the right person. If that's a woman or a man is really not relevant, you will hire for the best person over there. And there are a lot, if you go with the open mind that it doesn't matter, you will find a lot of women coming in who are very suitable for the roles that you're looking at. Now, I'll also say this, that this is not in a hospital sector. You will find that there are reasonable amount of women doctors, but the moment you get into the administration and into the senior leadership, there are very few women. So it's not that just because it's healthcare, it happened automatically. It was something that we had to engineer, or that we ended up doing more because our mindset was more open towards that. So that's a little bit on the Portia. Of course, we had all the structures that all organizations have. I'm saying in over and above that, this is probably a big differentiator. And when you talk about the caregiving challenge that women go through, all of us, I'm sure you have handled elderly, you've handled your children. So we are all the sandwich, not generation, sandwich gendered of the generation who look after both the children and then the elderly. So this is something which is a reality. Now you see a little more of men also stepping up to take care of the especially of the elderly, not so much of the children, I think, but especially with the parents, there is a lot more of that stepping up that's happening. But that said, most organizations make a lot of structures to help women and nowadays men to manage their children.
Yeah.
Who thinks about elder care or about care for seniors and their families, extended families, etc., as a requirement?
Right.
We don't really think about that. Now, that is something which needs to come in as a very overt policy or structure that organizations need to put in place, whether it is incremental vacation time for somebody whose parents are going through serious illness, or palliative care towards end of life. Those are things which are required, but I don't think that is something which is thought about yet. Some few corporates I notice are starting to talk about offering to provide elder care services, just like they perhaps reimburse child care, just like they reimburse maybe nanny services. They are saying, okay, we will also offer you elder care services for your parents and have you provide access as well, not just the finances, but also access for that. So those are small baby steps that are happening in that direction, but I think we are quite some way away. Of course, the first thing that happened was some amount of insurance was being provided for parents and so on.
Yeah.
But there is a flip side to that. I think a lot of corporates are a little worried about that, and they're asking people to employees to pay for their cover for their parents, because there's been too much of claims. The claims ratio are not tenable. So I sat in the board of a insurance company, so sometimes I'm kind of aware of that. So that's a problem for the insurance companies. But apart from insurance, you need day to day, you need a lot of support to take care of your families and also your elders in your family. It doesn't just mean getting someone to be in place, but it's an ongoing thing. You need to track that. You need to make sure that they are being on a day-to-day basis cared for. They are being provided what they need. Services are available at their doorstep as and when they require, so that you don't have to go take your parent out for some services and so on. So there's lots that can be done and needs to be done. Mental health of elderly is not something that we pay attention to. There is a dialogue at least of mental health of the working populace, but the elders go through huge amount of mental health challenges, as they become older, they feel unusable, or people, they think that they're not adding any value to their families. So that feeling of why are we here, we are a burden, that creates a lot of depression and unhappiness, or on the other side can create aggressive behavior, both of which need a lot of support. Dementia is a fast growing problem in this country, as it is in any other part of the world. The longer people live and longevity is going up, we will see much more of dementia, which is very difficult to handle. So you do need specialized care for that. So there are a lot of new things that needs to be brought in to support the caring or seniors in this country.
Absolutely. And with all of the research, innovation happening on longevity, I think our lifespans are only increasing. And so pretty much a lot of countries are struggling with aging population, India as well at some point, and therefore somebody will have to take care of the people who need it. And
may I just add one more point? Government has, for instance, said that 6 months of maternity leave has to be provided to women.
Yeah.
Good, but what about women who need to take care of their elders? There is no policy around that. There is no regulatory offer for them. So again, I think the government, from a regulatory perspective, also needs to come in to see, is there something that has to be provided? The men or the women, whoever needs to be there for the seniors, is there some more support that needs to be provided to them also?
Absolutely. Coming back to your point on, women in leadership, right? You talked about the fact that because you were in all those positions of decision making as a woman leader, you were sensitized to what the other women were going through. And I've heard this over and over again from so many leaders that, look, it makes a difference, not only in how you treat the employees of both genders, but also in sensitizing other male leaders around you.
Absolutely.
But it is such a hard task to have women leaders. You talked about healthcare, and it's the same thing there, where, according to our Close the Gender Gap data, healthcare is the one sector in which it has the largest number of women, 41%. But when it comes to women in leadership, again, really low.
Yes.
Pharma is the same.
Yes.
I remember growing up in banking, that was the bright spot with so many women CEOs like Naina Lal Kidwai and Kalpana Moraparia and Shikha Jain and Arundhati Bhattacharya. And then now suddenly we are back to that place where there is a vacuum of women leaders. So I have been curious about why is it so hard? Like, you take one step forward and then one step backward. And what can we do to make it stick in maybe banking, but some other sectors as well?
Well, the banking story, I think, is kind of linked to one particular company which did something extraordinary to get women in right at the beginning, and that was ICICI. There is no doubt about that. I remember early days when I sold my company to ICICI, first company, I had gone to visit the headquarters, and I was stunned to see that there was a daycare in the year 2000 in the office. I said, my God, this happens in companies. They actually provide daycare. So they were obviously way ahead of time, and perhaps that's what led to women choosing to work there, and then at the leadership there actually went out of their way to groom a lot of women. So many of the names that you took actually came from that stable, if you notice. So keeping that aside, that I think was a little bit of an outlier. But really, if you look at what comes in the way, or what are the blockages for getting enough women leaders in various sectors, I think there are many things, and one of which I just mentioned about is the leadership. So for a moment, I'll just keep that aside. That is a very, very critical factor, and that can decide how the organization culture is set and so on and so forth. But apart from that, there is the society at large, the regulatory frameworks, what are the benefits and difficulties that are put in way when women are employed or not employed. Are there incentives, or are there reasons for them to see that this is something worth hiring for? The second thing is the women themselves, how do they feel about being part of the workforce, and will they really want to make that extra effort to go to the next level and keep on going? So I don't want to talk about the first. I do want to talk about the individual and what comes in the way in many cases. I find that women in their 40s perhaps start to question, is it really worth my while? Why am I making so much of effort with maybe compromise? Initially, there's a lot of excitement and you want to grow and so on and so forth. But at a certain stage, perhaps in their late 30s, 40s, they start to have these questions. Is there really any point? Why am I making so much of an effort? On one side, maybe the husband is earning well, so the family is doing okay. So why should I put in so much effort? But that actually speaks to the fact that the organization has not really made that extra effort to make the women feel that they are truly contributing and that their presence is actually moving the needle, that they are able to, they're being compensated fairly, they're getting all the growth opportunities that other men are getting. So if the women see that they have to put that little extra fight each time to go to the next step, then they start to withdraw and say, really, is it worth my while? Why should I go through that? So that is something that is that's coming in more now. In my generation, the women who were there were few and far between, and we were probably outliers. And we said we just, we had to do it, so we did it because of whatever. But now a lot more of women are coming in through the doors. But as they go along, if they find that the going is too hard because the world is making it harder for them, then they said, okay, fine, never mind. So there is that worry that I have that it starts to become stagnant at some stage because culture is not something which is drawing women out through the ranks and forcing them to come up because it's so exciting for them. So that is something I think we need to look at and see where are those drawbacks that are coming. Now that said, much of the growth happened in some of the industries. There are many industries which have still not succeeded at all, and they've remained in like manufacturing, like pharma. They've remained in, even in the entry level, they've remained probably at double digits and that early double digits and so on. Now there we have to do all that we did in the IT sector and in the service sector. We have to bring them through the entry levels. We have to go out of the way. In the bank that I am associated with, we over the last year and a half, we've been working very hard to say that in the rural banking, in sales, we will have women. I mean, come what may, we have to have women. I mean, why will we not have women? What are you saying, that women don't have any career aspirations? That's not true. You're not creating the right atmospheres. You're not insisting that we get enough women candidates through the door. And I think this push has seen a difference. So some of that has not happened in certain sectors, and we need to make extra effort to get in more women through the doors from the lower level, so that we can see them then continue to rise through the ranks. So there are number of issues. I think all of that needs to be constantly worked on. It's obviously
It's
WIP.
Complex socio-economic problem. And Meena, as you're talking about some of these companies, there are clear outliers on companies who have really, despite all of the challenges, been able to create a gender diverse workforce. The top leadership has committed to it. Through your experience, are there any specific examples of what some of these companies have done to dismantle barriers on the demand side, be it hiring, retention, return to work, women in leadership? Because when you talk to some of the leaders, they fall in two categories. One, are not even convinced that you really need to put in that effort. Their point is, look, why invest so much on it until there are more jobs than people? There are so many other critical problems to solve. And the second is the set of leaders who will say, look, I want to hire women, and we really try very hard, but it's a pipeline problem. It just keeps thinning. We hire, and then retention is a problem. So it would be really good to hear some examples from you as to, how should some of these business leaders think about making it happen?
Yeah. So coming from the first question of yours, which is, why should we hire women? when there are more men than the jobs that are available.
Yeah.
Well, the thing is that we are not hiring women just so that we can keep the woman part of the world happy. Okay, we are hiring them because they bring in skills which are essential for your organization. Having a diverse workforce which represents the genders, the geographies, the age groups, all other cultural and sexual orientation variants is so important because your customer base is such. Right? If you're not reflecting your customer base and all you want to get is a series of white males, as in some of my companies had, it doesn't reflect, and you will never be able to think on behalf of your true customer base because you're so polarized in your thinking. So let's be very clear that the reason to hire women is not because you're going to make that constituency happy. You're hiring them because it is good for you as an organization, as a leader of an organization. When you get the right representation of women and men and all other variants that you want to cover, you are ensuring that A, you reflect your customer base. B, you're making sure that you're getting the best of competencies and you're not diluting that by only focusing on a certain kind of people. And three, we have seen examples of how having women on boards has actually transformed a lot of organizations. There is enough data. I'm sure you have access to that data that companies which have got more women in leadership or women on the boards have seen better performance. And there is a reason for that because they bring a different kind of maybe a little more patience, maybe a little more collaborative. Maybe the aggression is there, but it is covered with a velvet glove, whatever it is. There are many theories there. I don't even want to go into that. But the fact is there is enough data to prove that you get the right balance, you will get a much, much more sustainable and profitable organization. In fact, one of the things that during my, when I started up and even now when I advise startup entrepreneurs, I always tell them, please don't build a startup with three of you boys from the same floor who worked in the same wing of a hostel. Please don't do that. That's the worst that you can do. Please build diversity. So starting from something as fundamental as that to a large organization, you need to have the right diversity of thinking and competencies so that you can build a strong organization. So that was for the first part of your question. Okay. Now the second part of your question, where is the pipeline? Where is the pipeline? That question always comes up. Now, of course, the pipeline will not suddenly emerge because just because you've decided today that you want to have more diverse workforce. But if you never make an effort, you will never have it. So this is something which is a chicken and egg. You can, if you say that there are no women who are out there lining up, you will never have women. But the moment you start to hire some women, you will find that more women are interested because they're seeing others come in. So they will also come in. And I have seen that across manufacturing in one of the companies that I'm part of, an effort to make women present on the manufacturing floor in a power sector company. The moment there are women present there, automatically we are seeing a lot more of women applicants from engineering, core engineering backgrounds who want to come and work there. They just see that and they say, okay, I can do it too, and this is safe or whatever. There are many things that we all think about. For the parents to say, okay, other girls are going there, my girl can go there. So there are so many things that come into place. But only if you make that initial effort of getting some women in through the door will you actually start to build the pipeline. So you can rue the fact that there is no pipeline, but you keep doing that, you're never going to get. That's the example that I was giving you about with the bank, that we had the same problem, especially with our rural banking branches where we had very poor diversity, but we just put out a mandate that women have to be on the slate, interview slate. You don't have a choice. They started to do that. Now we see a lot more of women automatically applying. And I was in, I told you I had gone to Nagaland on a visit. I visited multiple branches over there. Very, very pleased to see enough women representation in each of those branches in as far an outpost as I ended up going to.
Right. Meena, I talk a lot about this power of three, and empirically I have seen it. Like,
Okay.
When you are like the only woman in the room, you hesitate to say, you think twice about speaking up, asking a question. When you are two, there is a little bit of competition. When there's three, something happens where the dynamic changes, the kind of that positive flywheel begins to move.
Sure.
Do you think it it makes sense for these companies to, or the top leadership to at least set some basic targets to move the needle from X to Y. It doesn't matter if it is from 3 to 5% or from 15 to 20%. But there are the pros and cons. I'd love to know from you, how do you view this setting targets for it? How effective is it? And what are the pros and cons?
I love your power of three. Yes, I can see that happen, and I've seen that in my own experience, having gone from absolute singleton for a long, long time to having multiple women in the same room. But so coming back to the point of, do we need matrices to track what is going on? 100% yes. Things don't happen just because we have a general feeling that, yeah, this is a good thing to do. Unless it is measured, it doesn't move. And something like this, which is difficult to do, it is not, especially in sectors which are not so easy to move. 100% there is a need to have matrices, not just at the outcome metrics, but also at how many people are you interviewing, how many people are there in the promotion slates, how many are being mentored. All of those are important so that you just keep on moving the needle a little bit at a time. If you don't measure it, it doesn't happen. People may say, but there are so many other important matrices, for with which the business lives and dies by. Why are you adding? Why are you burdening people? But that's the point. It's not a burden. It is a very, very important parameter which helps the business do better.
Yeah.
So the moment you see that, then you will invest in that.
Right. And also it's the tension between the short-term quarterly thinking and long-term thinking. Like you
Yes.
said, innovation happens when there is a diverse workforce, different ideas coming up. And if you do not invest in the long term, innovation will stifle
Of course.
at these organizations. Nina, coming to the entrepreneurial world now,
Yes,
the same problems exist there, right?
definitely.
I think the number now in India is about 5% of VC funding goes to women-led startups.
Sure.
And what I'm appalled by is that even in sectors where women are the primary consumers, where women deeply understand the market, like femtech now, there is so much research happening on menopause, fertility issues,
Yeah.
etc. You still see that women-led startups are a minority. Why is it that we are still stuck at this low number? And what is it that we can do to move the needle and help women scale some of their enterprises? Because women are becoming entrepreneurs. They are starting businesses. But there is a challenge when it comes to scaling up their businesses. So what are the big barriers and how can we address them?
Oh, sure. There are, again, barriers which are at different levels. One, if you look at the entrepreneur herself, there are, it's taken a long time, and perhaps in the last 4 or 5 years, do you see women really stepping up and being in the forefront? Otherwise, while the idea might have been theirs, they are happy to have some male member be the front and taking a little bit of a back seat, or they would say that, oh, I can do the thinking, I can design the product, but I'm not the salesperson, I can't do fundraising, I can't meet investors. These are all excuses that we give ourselves. Nobody is born with all the competencies. All of us have to struggle and learn and figure out how to raise money, or how to work with investors, or how to sell. But if you think that you are the right person, it's your idea. If it is something that you're very passionate about, why should you hold back? That's a question that women need to be asked again and again, so that they are able to take that step forward. So now, as more women entrepreneurs are around who have created funded companies or who have successfully exited, and so that whole cloud of successful women, as it starts, successful women entrepreneurs, as that grows, the rest of the people also start to feel a little more confident that yes, it is possible. They have somebody to look up to, they have role models that they can talk to, they can learn from, they can get mentored by. So that's one whole challenge that is there. And now there are a lot of resources also that are available, which be it TIE, be it IIM Bangalore, number of people have, or there are funds which are women, meant only for women and so on. So that sort of gives you a little more of support as you go on. So that's one section. The other section is that in the VC part of the industry itself has been extremely male dominated, and only off late we are seeing some women investors that are coming through, and you need to have enough women investors so that you end up investing in women entrepreneurs. So that's always a challenge that may not be very articulated very openly, but no doubt that exists, that there is a little bit of gender bias that exists. So that needs to be overcome as well. And that is a matter of time, because now as women start to grow in the VC community and they become the leading investors, they will end up perhaps investing more freely in women-led entrepreneurs.
And you're right, we are seeing kind of this a number of incubators, accelerators, venture capital firms focused on women-led startups. AI is everywhere these days, and so I was reminded of this story about women coders from 1930s, World War II, where a lot of the calculations were done by women.
Correct.
And they were called computers.
Yes.
And but even at that time, they were considered the low-level. That was considered the low-level clerical work, and as opposed to the production of hardware. And then Grace Hopper was one of the pioneers, and as the industry matured and the prestige became higher, it became more highly paid.
Yes.
And more men came into the job. Women were nudged out. Not much changed in terms of the job composition, but the gender composition changed. And as we are going through this AI-led disruption, AI and robotics-led disruption, I'm wondering if that pattern will repeat itself, or if there is any way to break that pattern.
Okay, my take on that is a little different. I feel that a lot of women went into the coding, computing, cracking of codes, etc., during the various wars, right? And at that time, the men were already out on the battlefield, so it's the women who are taken into these kind of roles. So there was an ascension of women there. But once war was over, and then women came back into being housewives, whereas the men were the ones who were going out and doing the service roles and including the tech roles, etc. Then, of course, as engineering became more popular, more and more women have gone into that, and they are slowly moving up. Now, that's in my view, that is the reason. It's not. Maybe what you're saying is also right, because it was a more better paid job, so men went for it. But I feel it is more social change that was happening, that women went back to being at home because now the men were available to do to bring the money home. Now, when I look at AI, I feel, okay, then the other interesting thing is that for a long time, tech was linked to STEM and maths, and people said women are not that good at math, they're not good at STEM, so it's the men who have the greater capability. So that was the other story that went on, and maybe women also internalized that, saying, I'm a woman, how can I be good at math? So perhaps that also came in as a part of the social the underlying theme that was there. Now, AI is very different, because with AI, it's no longer the maths and the science which is the core skills. It's creativity, it's articulation, it is design. So, and I believe that women actually are equally good, if not better. And or at least that's what we've been given to believe, that these are skills of women. So, hey, now it should be the time for women to be the leaders, because now it has come back into that domain, which is meant to be very good for the women. But then again, this is a constant up and down. But I do believe that the AI actually gives a higher opportunity for people of all domains to start becoming very competent in building products, building solutions, etc. Because they no longer have to depend on a STEM skill or a math skill to be able to build the product. The AI will do all of that tough work for them. They really need to be the visionaries and the people who define what the solution needs to be, what impact it has to have for someone. So I do believe it should sort of even the tables for people, not just of all genders, but of different competencies.
Absolutely. And roles like where women are in a majority now, like caregiving, teaching, nursing. I think while no job is immune from
Sure.
AI at this point, but those are the ones that will be taken later. So
Yes,
there is an
yes.
opportunity for us to
Yes, absolutely correct. Yeah.
to create a system to empower and get more women into
True,
these
true.
roles. One last question, Meena. Meena, what advice would you give to business leaders today who are sincere about building a gender diverse workforce in their companies?
Firstly, I think business leaders need to understand that this is a business imperative. This makes a difference to their profitability, growth, their success, their sustainability. So they need to look at it from that angle. So once they have convinced themselves that that is the case, then ask the women who are already with you, what is it that's coming in the way? What is blocking their growth? What is blocking more women from joining? Because one of the things that I notice is that a lot of men are thinking on behalf of the women, not necessarily asking them. So that is something which I think would be very valuable. I remember in one of such conversations in a open forum, I remember the man asked me this, and when I told him, "Did you ask the woman in your organization?" He was a little stunned. He said, "You really? I know, I know. Actually, I should just do that." So that is something which doesn't come so automatically, because those who are in the decision making will take the decisions. They don't necessarily ask the people who are impacted to why, how, what is going on, what are the issues. So that requires a little bit of self reflection and being a little more open and getting inputs from the constituencies who are actually being sought after, and look at your peers, look at other companies in your industry, see what are they doing. Are they doing something different? I'm sure that they can help them with case studies, with the best practices, and better to learn from each other rather than trying to invent again and again.
Thank you, Meena. It was such an insightful conversation. It was literally a masterclass in building with purpose. And you've also given a lot of food for thought on how we can accelerate women's participation in our economy. Your journey of building Tutor Vista, Portia Medical, and now Bahar Foundation really demonstrates the fact that gender should never be a gating factor. And if we are serious about economic growth, we really need to focus on efficient talent allocation, making sure that the right opportunities are matched with the right individual, regardless of their gender. Thank you so much for joining us and for inspiring us to keep pushing the boundaries of achieving this inclusive growth. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pooja. I really enjoyed our conversation. All the best.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us on Udayti Dialogues on Women and Economic Growth.